Iranian security-linked messaging is leaning hard into a new theme, that the United States is facing a quiet manpower and morale crisis at its Middle East bases, and that the strain is forcing Washington into concessions up to and including President Donald Trump's decision to accept a truce and pursue a broader grand bargain with Tehran. On April 14th, the intelligence arm of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps put out a statement portraying American troops across the Gulf as worn down by months of instability, repeated alerts, constant repositioning, and the psychological pressure of living under the threat of attack. The claim is being used to argue that Iran's campaign, especially missile and drone strikes it says it has conducted against U.S. facilities, has degraded readiness and confidence and is now driving a wave of requests to resign or leave service. Iran's IRGC intelligence said asterisk despair and frustration are taking a heavy toll on U.S. forces in the region. Intelligence. ENT's assessments and some field reports on the condition of U.S. forces in the region suggest that a deep and significant sense of frustration and hopelessness has set in among them. Asterisk chairing the statement framed the alleged morale collapse as something measurable and widespread, not anecdotal. It cited what it described as intelligence assessments and field reports, and then listed drivers of the mood, ongoing Iranian strikes, what it called Washington's tendency to dismiss on-the-ground reporting, and the churn of constant redeployments and shifting orders. Iran's IRGC intelligence said asterisks, according to these reports, several factors are driving that mood, the repeated and effective strikes by Iranian missiles and drones on military bases. Officials in Washington brushing aside field reports and on-the-ground data, constant redeployments, living under unstable conditions, and repeated changes in plans ordered by the president and the defense secretary. And then came the most pointed number presented as proof of a breaking force. Iran's IRGC intelligence said asterisk, in just the first month of the war, around 734 resignation or discharge requests were reportedly submitted from bases in 3 Persian Gulf countries. As the message didn't stop there, it claimed the departures cut across the chain of command, from senior leaders to junior enlisted personnel, and suggested the trend wasn't isolated to a few posts. Iran's IRGC intelligence said these departures span every level from senior commanders to the lowest ranks. It also included a line meant to sound like an inside look at Pentagon priorities during the conflict, an insinuation that leadership is willing to absorb losses in personnel so long as it avoids the political catastrophe of captured American troops. Iran's IRGC intelligence said asterisk, at the same time, senior military commanders say that under orders from the defense secretary, the loss of soldiers is not considered a red line. What matters most is preventing commanders and troops from being taken captive. Asterisks, U.S. officials have not confirmed the IRGC's resignation figure, and there is no independent public accounting that verifies the claim as stated. Still, the narrative itself matters because it is tailored to a particular moment, a tense pause in fighting, ongoing negotiations, and a new maritime confrontation tied to the Strait of Hormuz. The ceasefire at the center of this moment is less than 2 weeks old. It has held long enough to create the possibility of diplomacy, but not long enough to remove the risk of renewed escalation. With the ceasefire in place, the information war has intensified, each side trying to shape what the truce means and who it benefits. Iranian-aligned messaging is now trying to persuade regional audiences that the United States accepted the pause not out of strategy, but out of strain. In that telling, the truce becomes a symptom, evidence that pressure is working, that American military posture is overextended, and that Washington is losing the ability to sustain the fight. That messaging has been reinforced by a second storyline. Questions about whether the U.S. Navy's blockade pressure is actually working, or whether it is already being tested, evaded, and undercut in real time. After talks ended without agreement, Washington moved to tighten maritime pressure on Iran-linked shipping. President Trump publicly signaled that the United States would begin blockading traffic tied to Iranian ports and would ramp up interdiction measures in and around the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most strategically important choke points. The White House framing has been that the goal is to constrain Iran's ability to profit from trade and to impose costs on the networks that keep sanctioned cargoes moving. But shipping data and early reported transits have fueled a counter-narrative that even under a new blockade regime, ships tied to sanctioned networks are still getting through. On April 14th, Reuters reported that a tanker linked to China and sanctioned by the United States successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz and exited the Gulf, citing multiple ship tracking data sets. The vessel is known as Rich Starry described as a medium-range tanker carrying roughly 250,000 barrels of methanol. According to the reported tracking data, Rich Starry's successful outbound transit was especially notable because it appeared to be the first such exit after the blockade began, an early visible test of enforcement in a waterway where credibility is everything. The ship's ownership and sanctions status made the incident even more politically sensitive. The tanker and its owner, Shanghai Shuanrun Shipping Company Limited, have been targeted by U.S. sanctions for alleged Iran-related dealings. And because the ship is tied to a China-linked network, the transit landed at the intersection of two pressures Washington is trying to balance at once: constraining Iran, while avoiding a broader clash with the world's largest importer and a major global shipping player. The reporting also added operational detail. The ship had loaded its cargo at Hamria in the United Arab Emirates, and its crew was described as Chinese based on available vessel data. Iranian messaging seized on the episode as propaganda gold, the suggestion that a sanctioned ship sailed through anyway with U.S. warships watching, warnings issued, and no effective stop. The point was not merely that one vessel passed, but that the blockade's deterrent effect could be weaker than advertised, and that Washington might be applying selective enforcement in ways that invite challenges. An Iranian embassy account on social media amplified that theme, mocking the blockade and ridiculing what it cast as American impotence. The Post leaned into the symbolism: a ship tied to sanctioned Iranian trade networks, flagged to a country far from the Gulf, sailing through a corridor the United States was supposed to control. The same day, another incident added to the sense of a shaky start. Reports cited U.S. military monitoring that said a partially loaded tanker, Elpis, also transited the strait on April 13th, shortly after the blockade was announced as set to begin. The vessel has been described as previously sanctioned due to alleged connections to Iran's shadow oil trade network. The incident was framed as an early test, and in the eyes of critics, an early warning that enforcement would be complicated, uneven, and politically constrained. The broader picture is that the Strait of Hormuz is not simply a line on a map. It is an arena where every transit becomes a message. Blockades depend not just on ships and rules, but on the perceived willingness to act and the perceived costs of acting against certain flags, owners, or cargoes. A single unchallenged transit can be spun as failure. A single interdiction can be spun as escalation. Both sides know that. This is the context in which Vice President JD Vance has been trying to keep diplomacy alive while defending the administration's posture at home. Vance led high-level talks that, according to U.S. officials, did not produce an agreement because Iran refused U.S. terms. Yet he also signaled that the administration believes there is still a path to something larger than a narrow ceasefire if Tehran is willing to accept the core U.S. demand that Iran not obtain a nuclear weapon. In public remarks, Vance addressed criticism from multiple directions, including questions about faith, war, and moral authority. He cited a statement attributed to the Pope about God and warfare and argued that moral clarity requires distinguishing between aggression and liberation. Vice President JD Vance said, God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. Vance said he welcomed the Pope's general emphasis on peace, but pushed back on what he portrayed as an overly absolute theological claim, arguing that history includes cases where armed force was used to end atrocities. Vice President JD Vance said, on the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes. Absolutely nowhere. He also responded to a shouted accusation about U.S. policy in Gaza, pointing to the administration's claim that it improved humanitarian conditions and helped secure an agreement there. His argument was that critics were misdirecting blame at the current administration for problems he said were inherited. Vice President JD Vance said when we came in, the humanitarian situation in Gaza was an absolute catastrophe. He then credited President Trump directly. Vice President JD Vance said, who's the person who got a peace agreement in Gaza? Donald J. Trump. He went further, saying humanitarian aid flows had increased. Vice President JD Vance said, right now you see more humanitarian aid coming into Gaza than it has any time in the past 5 years, because we have taken that situation seriously. After that exchange, attention returned to Iran. Asked what he made of Iranian negotiators, whether they were the right people, whether they truly wanted a deal, Vance described the meeting as historically unprecedented in modern U.S. Iran relations, emphasizing the depth of mistrust and the limits of what a single round of diplomacy can accomplish. Vice President JD Vance said the United States had never had meetings at that level with the Iranian government in 49 years. He said he believed the Iranian side wanted an agreement, but conceded uncertainty and highlighted that mistrust cannot be undone quickly. Vice President JD Vance said, but yeah, I think the people we're sitting across from wanted to make a deal. He then described the instruction he said the U.S. team received from the president. Vice President JD Vance said, asterisk, the president of the United States told us to go out there and negotiate in good faith. That's what we did. That's what we're going to keep on doing. Asterisk, Vance underscored the administration's foundational policy line on Iran's nuclear program. Vice President JD Vance said fundamentally the president set a policy Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He said negotiations are aimed at that outcome and pointed to the ceasefire as proof that diplomacy still has room to operate, calling it nearly a week old and holding. Vice President JD Vance said, asterisk, we have the ceasefire that's in place. I think it's 6 or 7 days old right now. The ceasefire is holding. Asterisk, ambition, not a narrow technical arrangement, but a comprehensive shift in Iran's relationship with the world, so long as Tehran changes its behavior on nuclear weapons and support for militant activity. Vice President JD Vance said, asterisk, he doesn't want to make like a small deal. He wants to make the grand bargain. Ashton isolated for in plain terms normalization in exchange for normalization. Vice President JD Vance said, if you're willing to act like a normal country, we are willing to treat you economically like a normal country. From Washington's perspective, this is the pitch. A pathway for Iran to join the world economy while surrendering the capabilities and relationships the U.S. views as destabilizing. Vice President JD Vance said, asterisk, what he's basically offering to Iran is very simple, that if you're willing to act like a normal country, we are willing to treat you economically like a normal country. Asterisk, aping the negotiating environment as much as any speech. On the Iranian side, security-linked channels are using the resignation and morale narrative to claim that time is on Tehran's side. On the American side, the administration is using blockade pressure and the threat of expanded interdiction to argue that time is on Washington's side. But the early shipping incidents, sanctioned vessels transiting anyway, and high-profile tracking data feeding headlines are already complicating that message. A blockade that is perceived as porous can lose coercive power quickly, while a blockade enforced too aggressively can provoke retaliation, widen the conflict, and risk dragging in other major powers. Meanwhile, the morale claim, whether true, exaggerated, or fabricated, serves a purpose regardless. It is designed to force American audiences and allies to ask uncomfortable questions. Is the U.S. force posture sustainable? Are bases under intolerable pressure? Is Washington prepared for a long campaign measured in months, not days? And if the truce holds, will it be remembered as a strategic pause or as the start of a negotiated climb down? For now, the ceasefire is holding, diplomacy is still being described as active, and both sides are fighting for the story that will define what happens next. The next few days will matter not only in talks and communiques, but in the quieter metrics that shape war and peace in the modern era: ship transits logged in tracking databases, redeployments ordered in the night, and the confidence or doubt felt by the people asked to carry it all out.